It helps if I unmute everything. Welcome, everybody, to Plus One EXP, which is a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and desire is to help amazing designers find great players who love their games and help amazing players find great designers whose games they can love. Normally, I sit down and talk with designers and other people who make games for Prestige Class, but I'm talking to a fellow content bard themselves. That's Chase Carter at Chase Writes over on Twitter, who is a freelance journalist covering the indie RPG scene across a number of platforms. You're most likely to know their work from Dicebreaker. And so, Chase, why don't you tell people about who you are, what you do? I already said where you could find you online. I stole your thunder there, but if there's another place you want to point them to, feel free to. Just let them know who you are.
Man, yeah, Tony, you kind of covered the whole gamut there. Yeah, so I'm Chase. I'm a freelance journalist. I spend most of my daylight hours doing news writing over at Dicebreaker. I write about board games as well as RPGs, both indie and the bigger ones. But you also can find my work over at Polygon. And I've written in the past about video games at a number of places, but I'm mostly focused on like analog tabletop stuff, unless something really comes across that
Awesome.
catches my eye. But yeah.
Awesome. I'm super excited to sit down. You and I would have considered us internet acquaintances. And then when you were in town for PAX, we got to sit in. I would say, if somebody was like, are you friends with Chase? I would say yes. You don't have to say the same.
I reciprocate. No, absolutely.
Awesome. It was great to get a chance to sit down to talk with you about all the insane things that were happening then and some of the fun things that have evolved over the last little bit. 3 days ago, you were like, does anybody want to talk to me about all this research I've been doing? And I was like, yes, absolutely. Let's talk. Because I love the conversations we got to have. I've also loved the articles you've been putting out about all the different things that are happening within the realm of crowdfunding. And I know you probably got a lot of research that doesn't make those articles because it may not be it may not be like the most, exciting details, but also some of the deeper data or some of your own conclusions that may not be best to put in an article would be fun to talk about. And so I'm excited to chat with you about all those things. Let's start at the place we kind of always start. We were chatting a little bit about this online before we went online. Tell me a little bit about how you got started playing games, and then kind of for RPGs specifically, what are some of your experiences around RPGs that you enjoy or have had a chance to play?
So my start in tabletop games is really super stereotypical. I was a teenager in high school in like the mid to late 2000s. And so that was at the height of 3.5, D&D 3.5. I also grew up in a rural town in Texas. So, I didn't have a whole lot of access or really knew how to go and find some of the weirder games that were going on at the time. I definitely didn't get into like any White Wolf or any stuff like that. So it was mostly a friend who had the wherewithal and the time after school to create a sprawling D&D 3.5 campaign for us, homebrew. He had taped about 30 pieces of A5 printer paper together, or printer paper's like whatever, the printer paper size together, just taped them together with his own hand scrawled map and just laid it out on a table and invited 5 or 6 guys over and said like, all right, let's have an adventure. And that's how I got started in tabletop games. From there, I got
to know, pause real quick.
Yeah.
What character were you playing?
What's the swearing on this show?
Whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do. I got you. You're good.
I was a real asshole and played a psionic, and specifically like a mind blade. I just wanted to crit as much as possible. And there were several discussions along the sessions before it petered out of really like cutting the legs out from under my character, because I was able to just like, I was min-maxing before I knew what min-maxing was as a concept, just because I thought it was cool to like put a knife into someone's brain, mentally speaking. Yeah, I was kind of a scourge early on. I have since become more wise and more sort of like approachable as a player, mostly because I have from that point onward just mostly run games, taught people how to play tabletop games. Yeah, so D&D was sort of my remit for a while until I got my hands on Dungeon World. And that was my introduction to like Powered by the Apocalypse, because for a while there, I got out of tabletop games and just played video games for a while. Dungeon World was my introduction back. And then after I'd learned that and really figured out what fronts were and what the hell they were talking about with fronts in that book, I just dove deep and started picking up as much as I could. and trying to convince my friends to play whenever possible. And so it was sort of kismet whenever whenever Matt Jarvis, editor over at Dicebreaker, put out a call back in 2020. I was between jobs thanks to the pandemic. And I had written for Dicebreaker once before, just doing some freelance stuff. And he's like, hey, we're looking for a small time news writer, just sort of, for a month or two. And I put my name in the hat, and Matt remembered me and said, wow, really loved your work. Let's bring you in. And after my month was done, he was like, you want another month? And I was like, sure. And then after that month was done, he's like, hey, do you want 3 months? And I was like, yeah. And then he's like, hey, why don't you stay on for the rest of the year? And I've kind of been kicking with them ever since.
That's awesome.
And in those 2 years, I have just fallen headfirst into as many games as I can get my hands on.
That's awesome. And we've already had somebody in the chat, Lone Archivist, who can't stick around with us the whole time, but we're glad you're here for the beginning. I know it's late for you. We're super glad you're with us, though. It says, like many other creators, is thankful for the insightful coverage of indie analog games, but they're curious what attracted you to that niche, indie specifically. Is there a reason that, in your view, is an important niche?
Yeah, so this is probably going to come up quite a bit in our conversations, is that I cut my teeth on covering what we might call enthusiast press, covering video games. And there's a lot of similarities between the two here. And just like here, indie games, like indie video games, are a vibrant, undervalued community. But I say undervalued, like it's just undercovered and undervalued by like the general populace. Because there's a lot of really good artistry and a lot of good creative push that happens whenever you're not bound by, say, licenses or big money contracts, or the sort of stipulations that big AAA studios have to do. Like, we have to put out a Call of Duty every year and a half or whatever it may be.
Right.
When you have that freedom and those constraints to like really dig down into what makes it, what makes a game important for you, what makes it fun for you, people are breaking molds in interesting ways that I think are important and should be like brought forward, and a light should be shown on those. But also, I don't know, I just have a brain for weird games, and I love them. I love them more than most like AAA content.
That's cool. I love that. Yeah, I'm excited to be able to kind of unpack some of that stuff as we go through. Blake Ryan also says "disintegrate for the win," which I believe is a reference for your psionic character, right? And so. Yep. No, I'm super excited to dive in. A big part of having everybody on, though, during the course of Zine Month, which you've been covering, so maybe we'll even hop to a little bit of conversation about it before we even just dive into these. We're talking about different RPGs, asking people to tell me a couple that kind of caught their eye that they want to talk about. You've got a couple, and I picked a couple new ones also too. We're gonna talk about those in just a minute. But and I don't remember if it was you or who wrote it. Dicebreaker has done a good amount of coverage on Zine Month already. But let's just start with that. Like, what are some of your take and your thoughts on Zine Month, which is this decentralized effort across platforms to help bring attention to zine weight RPGs? For anybody who doesn't know what a zine is, it's a book about this big. It can have any type of content in it. It can be made in any number of different ways. Typically, it's saddle-stitched, half-page, and these ones specifically have RPG content inside. But tell me a little bit about your take. We're 3/4 of the way through Zine Month. What are some of your kind of early takeaways and your thoughts about what you've seen so far?
Yeah, so I will say, just right off the bat, it is so much easier to find and peruse zines in Zine Month than Zine Quest ever was. And I think that like really speaks to the problem of Kickstarters. We're going to really beat Kickstarter's back end in this episode, I think. So strap in for that, folks. Yeah, we're going to be relentless. But
somebody should go clip that right now.
Yeah, I'll attach that to every media inquiry I send to them from now on. But whenever I first started at Dicebreaker, like I said, I started in November, December. So like Zine Month 2. I believe that would have been 2021, because this would have been Zine Quest 3. So Zine Quest 2 was one of the big sort of like indie pushes that I started to cover. And without really knowing a whole lot, I was trying to like orient myself to like this scene, as well as learning this job and also covering board games at the same time. So I was having to learn 2 different spheres at the same time. I was like, am I missing where Zine Quest is going on? Like, everyone's talking about it, but there's no landing page. There's no like website for Zine Quest. You just had to like search on Twitter or like search within Kickstarter, and hopefully some of the projects would show up that you want to see. Zine Month is doing so much of a better job collating all these projects and like helping the discoverability by taking them off of the platform and just putting them on a dedicated website.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's great. It helps me as someone who covers them, who wants to cover them. It has to help someone who just like is looking for a few projects to pick up and back.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it is really interesting. Like, the only landing page for Zine Quest on Kickstarter was kind of the rules, and even then, it was really hard to locate. Like, it was always kind of interesting to be like, why aren't they just tagging? I'm like, you could get tagged with Zine Quest and still not show up very well in searches. So you had to know very specifically how to look for it. Even when I was doing backer quests last year, I would pop up the page and I would like have one version that was RPGs, one version that was TTRPGs, and one version that was Zine Quest, and I would look across all of them to make sure I was getting the most recent projects to be able to talk about. And even then, still sometimes you get to the end of the month and you're like, oh yeah, I didn't know, because it was a new creator who didn't know what they were supposed to do to get on it, right? Like they didn't know how to tag or any of that kind of stuff too. And as much as that website has had a lot of growth this month and it will still hopefully improve for next year, having a place you can go for all of them, it's just like, here's where it is. Also, that can kind of live a little bit more in perpetuity, I think is going to be a cool piece for that. Any other thoughts or insights on the overall thing before we dive into some of the games?
Yeah, I am really interested to see like how many people show up for Zine Quest in August whenever it shows up. And I know that some folks were like really hoping for like a total separation from Kickstarter for this first one, and a lot of projects still showed up on Kickstarter. And I think if you are kind of disappointed that there wasn't a larger divestment, keep in mind that like, especially if like this is your livelihood, you plan these things out quite a lot in advance, and you can't just on a dime switch to another platform.
Right.
So when Zine Month 2023 rolls around, I think we're going to see a lot more of that divestment. Again, we'll see what happens in the 8 months with Kickstarter, but I think that for their first month, it was such a strong showing, and I'm just excited to see what happens with Zine Month in the future.
Me too. I have been very clear, like, if we divest fully from Kickstarter, that's a choice we make as a community, right? I really don't have a problem with it, because I do see the good of, like, having projects on Kickstarter brings eyes to Zine Month to a certain degree that wouldn't necessarily be aware that it was happening otherwise. And I think that discoverability is good. And I think the real good we can do is not say this is a good platform, this is a bad platform, but inviting people to make good and intentional choices that best support their project while building up the community. And even if I don't want that to be Kickstarter, like, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be the best choice for them. And I want to be able to, that creator, to have that latitude and have that freedom. But I'm not on the organizing team for ZiMo, even though some people think that I am. Dice Drinks and Drama says, indie TTRPG community is straight up the best community. Anyone who wants to create storytelling game out of eating scones and sewing bits of cloth together is probably going to be a great person. Zine Month has been a beautiful force of community action. Kickstarter should take notice. This is what decentralized funding looks like. And it certainly doesn't involve them. Like, it's interesting that the move to decentralize, like, Kickstarter is already succeeding in helping decentralize itself from crowdfunding by just making people not want to fund on it. With that said, let's look at some of the projects that are funding right now. You sent me 3. I've got 2. Let's start out. Not the first time we've talked about it on stream, but a personal favorite project of mine is Crush Depth Apparition by Amanda Lee Frank, who we had on earlier this week. This was your choice, so tell me a little bit about Crush Depth, what it is, and what attracted your eye to it.
So this is a horror mystery sort of like thriller game that takes place on a submarine deep within the Atlantic. Around the time that things go weird, things start to break down in mundane ways, and then they start to break down in the sort of existential reality way, which I think is wonderful. I am always drawn to RPGs that take place on really unique and novel settings. And a submarine deep within the Atlantic Ocean is pretty novel as far as things go. So that's what immediately caught my eye, as well as like the stark red and black sort of line work on, at least on the cover art for Crush Death Apparition. Like, it's incredible. So I know we're early on in the sort of like layout of this game, but what Frank lays out is a game where you have to try to solve the mystery of what is going on here before the haunting goes from like the beginning phase into like a later phase into its final, maybe disastrous phase. And depending on how far you travel through here, what you end up finding out, it can go one of several ways, right? You could get to the end and figure it out too late as the whole thing sort of breaks apart into the ocean. or you might go down this like hallway of tubes and pipes into this graveyard of other submarines that should not exist within this little sub, down a hallway that shouldn't exist, and then you make it to some weird other world. It's very vague in the best sort of way, but just enough to like really capture the imagination and get me excited to like run some people through here on a dark, stormy night with the lights turned down low.
Love it. Yeah, I was when we were talking to Amanda, I was like, you should get to a higher level. That's come play with me on a submarine in Chicago late one night in a rainstorm. Everybody will back at that $10,000 level or whatever it is. No, Amanda's design is so good. I've never had a physical copy of Garbage Barge. Right after our interview the other day, I was like, I'm solving this problem because I have Vampire Cruise sitting right behind me. But Garbage Barge, their first of the Bad Boat trilogy, showed up today. So this was an early back for me. I also used my backing on this to get all of Bats' stuff from the Nerve store that I was behind on also too. So this is one of my top 3 most anticipated projects of Zine Month. Amanda's just a tremendous artist and writer, and has run for us on stream once and played and come on for a couple other different pieces that I've just been really grateful to work with them. But one of the things I love about this project is we're getting to see Amanda flex design muscles more and more. Like early on, it was very narrative and the art pieces, and there were things that were small procedures on there, but like the haunting procedure and the passage of time and the way that this works is solidly like very much in the OSR sphere, but very narratively heavy, very cool, and yeah, it leaves it vague enough to do a lot of cool stuff with. And Amanda made an announcement earlier today, like they're certainly past their $3,000 funding goal, which is going to mean they're able to bring on the full team to do all the editing, layout, and project management and fulfillment. But they're still working on getting up to the $4,000 stretch goal. So as long as that gets hit in time for them to do it, if you haven't backed this yet, they're still working on that second stretch goal, which is going to be full color interiors, which I would love to see because Amanda's art just is tremendous on this entire project. So I'm super excited to see where it ends up being able to go. The next one I wanted to talk about was Cadence. So this was one of the ones that I kind of tossed out. This one's funding over on Indiegogo. It's one of a handful of projects we've seen on Indiegogo. I've backed 3 non-games related things on Indiegogo historically. Every single one of them has quickly and easily fulfilled. I've never had a problem using Indiegogo. I know it has a bad reputation in some parts of the scene, but also like if you're a podcaster, Indiegogo is like the platform of choice for podcasting because Kickstarter removed it as a category a few years ago. And so they were like, well, how are people going to find our stuff? And so they all just moved over to Indiegogo. And so there are parts of the creative scene where this is their platform of choice for a lot of like creative tech stuff and things that are kind of not like your big, computer tech, but other like physical technologies. We'll do a lot of funding on it. I've never had a problem with it, though. I do know, I also know that New TSR has tried to launch a funding project on here numerous times in the last little bit, but also guess what? They've all gotten shut down too. And so that's the good news. But it is kind of an interesting thing. That said, Cadence is the story of distance and its pair. The story of a distance and its pair. It's a storytelling game about measuring the distance between two people in a changing relationship. I've become very jealous of Jeff Stormer, who just plays 2-player RPGs over the last little bit. Like I got to play the Snow Queen with Gian. I got to play I Guess This Is It with Cesar, and I love the quick intimacy of a 2-player game, and so they're catching my eye a whole lot more of like. Historically, I would get group games or solo games, and that 2-player game slot I wouldn't look at as much. But I love the work Jeff does, and it's exposed me to a lot of the fun of that. But sitting down and doing it has been really exciting also too. And so like I said, this is a game that's caught my eye a couple of times just because of the art. But it's designed to be played by 2 people asynchronously. So players create the story of a relationship's life from the moment of its conception until the moment it ends. Maybe it's a cashier and customer, parent and child, 2 members of a 5-person polycule, best friends, or even mortal enemies, enemies to lovers, lovers to enemies, whatever you want to do. And so there's the distance and the pair. So you're playing kind of as the concepts of these 2 things, not necessarily just the 2 people themselves. So
right,
the distance is
cool.
like yeah, the kind of shifting realities around that. It means you're looking for words and metaphors that describe kind of the abstract things, and the pair is then to step into like the humanity of that situation. It's just a really cool take on something, like I said, that has some similar themes to I Guess This Is It, that Cesar just pulled out, but does it in a very distinctive and different way. And so it's a co-op also too that's helped putting it out. The art looks gorgeous. I love the cover with no titling, right? It's just like this is kind of a magical artifact. It's really interesting. This spread right here, the like the face down spread, has been very popular this ZiMo. I know 3 people who it drives absolutely nuts as a mock-up layout piece. Not for any reason other than they're like, why would you ever do that to a book? You would never do that to a book. And I was like, I got news for you about what I do to my books sometimes.
Yeah. Real horror show.
But like I said, I think a really cool project. Have you had a chance to check this one out?
No, but this like really this reminds me of another ZiMo game, Signal to Noise.
Signal to Noise, yeah.
Yeah. So I actually just put out a tweet a couple of weeks ago looking for like play-by-post or epistolary sort of games, and so like I'm really glad that you brought this one up, because I have a deep longing to bring these sort of games and play with my brother, who's across the U.S. In California working a job, but he likes games like this, but never really gets a chance to play. And I think games like Cadences, like Signal to Noise, would be just the perfect way for like you and someone who's distance between y'all to play a game together.
Yeah, like I said, I've been super excited about it, and I think the entire presentation of the book is so dang gorgeous that it absolutely warrants more attention, more consideration. It's funding well. It's not quite there yet, so it's got 55 backers. It's got 19 days left. One of the things we want to shout out, like being on Indiegogo means you don't have the ecosystem that Kickstarter brings in. It also means you don't have the ecosystem that Itch brings in. Like Itch has a leg up on Indiegogo in a lot of ways because we have a lot of people on the platform. We have a following on there. Somebody stepping on Indiegogo the first time could really use your help. Same thing's true of GameFound. We'll talk about that later. But I would really encourage people to check it out. Oh, I also forgot to drop the links to both of these in the chat, but they are all in the description of this video if you are watching later. Couple comments from the chat. Meat Castle, I'm going to come back to your question in a little bit, but people love the cover on this one. A lot of positive comments, and the concept of this would do well, I think, as a perfect bound book also to your comment, Meat Castle. Let's see. The Last Sentinels. This was one of your picks. Tell us a little bit about The Last Sentinel.
Yeah, so Last Sentinel is the story of it wears its Battlestar Galactica influence on its sleeves. There is a ship that's carrying the last of humanity away from a threat that is chasing it, and the players will play. They all play the pilot of this one mech who must do everything they can to protect this ship carrying these refugee humans away from the threat to wherever there may be safe harbor out among the stars. So I really like this game because all of the players share one character sheet for the pilot and the mech. And then there is also like the rest of the people on the ship who are not player characters themselves, but sort of like create this like sort of ensemble of people who can affect the pilot. Another thing that is built into the very foundation of the game is that the pilot is doomed, whether through tragic betrayal or like a final sort of heroic stand. At the end of the game, they will sacrifice themselves to earn salvation for the people who they're trying to protect. And so you play through this, it's sort of like, it's for 3 or 4 players. It's more narratively driven. It's supposed to take 1 or 2 evenings to do. So it's a very short, very bounded game. That is just like high drama, high emotion, and high sort of like interpersonal connections, and what that leads us to do, what that means, how that defines what is precious to us and what we'll do to protect it.
I was just like, I'm scrolling through this and it's also beautiful. Then I realized I had not switched over so that everybody else could see how beautiful it was while we were talking about it. The art's gorgeous. The presentation is good. I actually just saw Lone Archivist is doing the layout on this, who does a phenomenal job. Will Yopes is doing the editing. Jason, the designer, is also somebody whose work I've really enjoyed. But these spreads are absolutely gorgeous. I love the flavor. I also, I'm a big fan of the of games that whether they're belonging outside belonging, but the GM-less space of a game where it's like, hey, you're all kind of sharing the spotlight, and you can pass characters around, and you can take scenes to play other forces in the universe, like pillars, like in Galactic 2E and other things like this. I feel like there's a lot of those vibes in here, and I'm just like I'm just stunned by some of the visual realities of this. I keep on meaning to do a deeper dive into this one and haven't got a chance to. So like I am super excited to kind of check it out and see a little bit more about what's up. But I do love the team on this one. But I also just like every spread being very self-contained, right? Like, here's what this spread is about on 1A5 page, the procedures for it on the next page. Very easy to just pick up and go, which I think, especially for a GM-less game, lots of times you'll end up in a more complex GM-less game, like with somebody kind of semi-facilitating. That simplicity of mode gives you really everything you need for everybody to take in that information and for you to start just making those community decisions and managing it, while still there being a solid level for how decision making breaks down within the game itself. So I just think it looks really, really cool also too. Sweet. All right, let's look at Arcane High, which is my next choice to talk about tonight. You know what? This caught my eye specifically because it reminds me of Kurt's Lighthearted. Like, as far as some of the general theme goes, it's a very different game, very different weight of a game. But I am a big fan of like the 80s vibes with fantasy thrown in, and then like the high school tropes on top of that is a good flavor. And so this game's just a few days in. It's got 19 days to go, but it still could use some love and support. So if you haven't checked out Arcane High, you said you kind of when I said this, have you had a chance to look at the game yet?
Yeah, I've been looking over it since you posted the link here, and it's I mean, it just like drips Saved by the Bell sort of flavor.
Right. Yeah,
I'm for.
But you could actually potentially freeze the world around you using magic, right? Like, I love. So I was a GURPS player early on. That's where I got my start, and so I am a huge fan of quirks and perks, and a lot of people's primary experience out of is through the Fallout games, right? Like, which a lot of that was a pullover from GURPS. One of the things that still made it into the final game, even though GURPS wasn't the engine that Fallout operated on. The quirks and the perks aspect are these small little things that happen that influence that. But the fact that there's 100 unique quirks in this that kind of gives very distinctive flavor means that there's going to be a lot of like cool things that you can pull in that give every single play and every single character design a lot of flexibility, a lot of nuance, but without creating a really rules heavy experience for the player. You always kind of have that double loaded experience of the more options you have up front, the longer it kind of takes to cruise through them and figure out, hey, you're like, what do I want to pull into my character? But also you could just roll on a D100 and take it and go also too, right? If you want to, which I think is also like a totally great choice. But again, and we got the face down right here again. This one is perfect bound also on the spine too. And so, but I love that gorgeous 80s art and the vibes, the whole team. Francita, the layout artist on this, is one of my favorite people working in the scene right now. And then Duwata is tremendous. Sin does just phenomenal work. I'm not familiar with necessarily everybody else on the design team, but I know Savage and I have had a couple conversations about this game, and it looks really cool. I'm also, this is a dumb thing, I like the breakdown of where the visual breakdown of where budgets are going. I think it's a very small technical piece, but it's actually I'd have zero, if it turns out that it goes slightly different places, I don't care, but I do kind of like the quick visual reality. Listing those numbers means very little to me. Showing me what those numbers look like as far as your total budget, I actually really love it when people do that as a whatever. Any other thoughts about this one?
I was just going to note that, I'm always a fan of a game that goes for 2 to 4 sessions. This one's for 4 to 5, but anywhere in that 1 to 5 range is my sweet spot where I am with my life. But I also like the 100, over 100 perks, because to me, what that says is this is going to be a game with a lot of replayability with different groups, and the experience is going to be different every single time, which tabletop games don't have to be replayable. That's absolutely not a requirement, but I do appreciate when one is, so that if I have, especially when it's sort of more lighthearted, like this one seems to be, which means that you can bring it to groups over and over again, or like slightly different people, and everyone will get a kick out of it without it being the same thing.
Yeah. And they do have a preview version over on itch. I dropped that link in the chat also too. So if you want to check out some of the spreads a little bit more closely, you can do that. But yeah, I agree. Like I think RPGs as opposed to board games and especially to video games tend to have, like tabletop RPGs tend to have far more replayability. But sometimes for a story game or other types, it can get a little like tropey or monotonous. And so that type of flexibility, especially within a very niche focus, is one of the things I think zine weight games do better than almost anything else, is figuring out what's the one thing we do that, even if the rules are very simple, open this up to being a highly replayable experience, and let's just kind of go as often as we want, or enjoy it one time and be done. Like For the Queen is kind of like almost the opposite, where it's always very different based on the decisions you have, but the mechanical processes, though it's randomized, largely similar from play to play, and you see some of that tropiness emerge, but you still are able to do great stories. But I will play For the Queen anytime people want, but it is like, it's not a game I would play night after night after night, because the narrative, I wanted to give it a little bit more space in between. Yep. I would play it once a month on average, as opposed to something like this where there's that variability means like, okay, I want to try something very different this time around. And so very cool. And then we've got last one up. We've got Glide. Tell us a little bit about Glide.
Yeah, I picked Glide. Glide caught my eye because I'm a simple person. I played Sable last year. It was my game of the year as far as video games go. And this is just Sable made into a solo RPG, which is just like splitting the uprights as far as getting me to back a project and play it as soon as possible. I played Cody Barr's last Zine Quest game, which was Courier, which was like
Courier is real good.
Yeah, so it's like a post-apocalyptic hex crawl where you are taking goods from like faction to faction to try to gain rep. They specifically wanted to create a game that did not have any combat or any sort of like conflict mechanics in the traditional sense at all, which is why they sort of drew on Sable, because Sable, and then by extension Glide's whole deal, is you are going out and sort of experiencing this world and trying to figure out where you're going to take your place once you sort of become this fully realized adult. And so you get to experience all the different guilds that make up the power structures of this world. You get to talk to people. You get to glide across dunes and experience like weird natural phenomenon. And at the end of it, you sort of take this whole bundle of experiences and memories and go, where do I fit in this world? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? And through play, you sort of figure that out. But also mechanically, you will gain some reputation with these different guilds, which might help you make that decision a little easier.
I love it.
So it is specifically a really introspective game about coming of age in a sci-fi or like fantasy world, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. These sample spreads from their preview are also just absolutely gorgeous. The visual, like Courier is a game I didn't back until the last minute, and only because it was like later on in CQ3, and I was having to worry about how much backing I had done at that point in time. Yep. But it was the visual appeal of Courier that kept on bringing me back to it, because the games that Sasquatch does is absolutely gorgeous typically. I also love these. I love seeing all the Sam Lee Goblin mixtape playlists on any of these funding pages also too.
Oh right, that's two of those I picked, huh?
Yeah. So I need to figure out how to embed mine on my itch.io page, because we have one from Sam for Through the Void also too. Nice. But awesome. That's all of our Zine Quest projects. ZiMo projects. Death to Zine Quest. No, we'll see what happens when Zine Quest comes up. One other one that we do want to talk about though is 13 Hunters. You didn't pick it because you don't like 13 Hunters, obviously. No, we were talking a little bit about this live, and to clarify, like I want to be very clear. This is Nuclear Obelisk Project. I am literally just the shill for this game. I ran it on stream a couple of weeks ago using Through the Void, because it's a bounty hunter supplement. 13 bounty hunters from all different backgrounds with all different capabilities. Each one of the spreads individually is very uniquely different. All the art, words, and everything else are all done by Nuclear Obelisk, who did the Power Words engine in Zine Quest 3, which was a tremendously beautiful project that was a real sleeper hit. Did incredibly well, but like everybody who got that was just kind of blown away by what it did. And so I had reached out to Nuclear and was like, hey, I would be happy to help partner with you, host this over on GameFound if you don't want to use Kickstarter. Let's get it taken care of and get it out there. So I would love to see more support for this. But have you had a chance to look at 13 Hunters?
Oh yeah, I think that conceptually, like every single one of these, like bounty hunter concepts are super strong. The artwork is like an immediate draw for me. It reminds me of what is it, Kill 1 Billion Demons, I believe is the name of the comic. Like, I mean that is the highest praise possible. It is like that sort of like strong characterization, bright colors, like beautiful weapons, and like just like weirdo designs as far as like anthropomorphic things go. Like there's a dog sheriff like smoking a hand-rolled cigarette next to a baboon with a poleaxe.
Right.
Like what more do you need?
Yeah. We got to play a couple of weeks when we played. This guy in the middle right here at the top, the Locksmith, was like, I put out a poll and was like, hey, here's groupings of 4. We're gonna pick 3 of them. Vote on the ones that you want to see. In his category of 4, the Locksmith was like, everybody, like, it was 100% agreement. This is the one that we want to see in. But they're a hemi-god who has been stripped of all their powers. They're like, except for like some very small loopholes that they have. So they can teleport anywhere, but only if that place is essentially what could be considered a prison. It has to be sealed, secure, enclosed in some way, shape, or form. So they can go anywhere as long as somebody there has to let them out. They also will oftentimes play on like being helpless, or in turn, they're very madcap. They're willing to risk themselves and do weird things to get what they want. And all they want is to basically capture other things and take them back to their like menagerie. It's a very, very cool thing. We got to play with the Whirligig also too. And we used the Fates, which are the gargoyles, in this one. And it was just cool. It was cool to drop it into a different, into a harder sci-fi system, and see what it looked like, even with some of those different pieces, and just kind of explore that with the players. And one of the cool things about it, it's also it's going to be the format for it is like an actual dossier file. So it's portrait formatted, right? But the binding will be on the top part of the book, and it'll actually like flip up, and so you'll have the beautiful like art on the top, and then the spread of information down below. So super excited about the project. Would love any support y'all can get it, even if you've already backed it. If you want to go share it with people, if you can't back it, if it's not something that would be useful for you, it's system and setting agnostic. If you could just share the project, it'd be great. GameFound also doesn't have an ecosystem for RPGs yet. We've been huge champions in trying to build that in. We've got some great conversations we're having with GameFound about ways we can do that over the course of the next year. But when you see an RPG project on GameFound, and just like with Indiegogo and games on tabletop, it's really helpful to be supporting them right now, because those ecosystems are still getting built to help decentralize what's happening in Kickstarter. GameFound is our favorite platform to be funding on right now for a lot of different reasons. But most of like all those come down to is like, we think it's a better platform. So feel free, like, go check it out. And if you want to back, please back them. Not if you can help share, that would be great also too. So I want to talk real quick about same thing. I didn't show any of the art that time. I was just cruising through. Here, look how beautiful it is. Yay. I'll leave it up there for a second. I want to ask you real quick, who would win in a fight? Matt or Charlie? We'll talk about 3 types of fight. This one's straight up fist fight, back alley, no one's watching. Who wins?
All right, so we're talking about Charlie Hall over at Polygon and Matt Jarvis, Dicebreaker, 2 people who sign my paychecks, depending on the day. All right, so who owes me money right now? Because that might be the winner. No, so I think in like first category, straight up fist fight.
Yeah.
I think Charlie's going to take that. He's a dad. He's got more than one kid, and I think that gives him a tenacity and a sort of like built-in, like sort of like dad stamina that Matt Jarvis just cannot bring to like just a straight one-on-one. So if we're just stacking stats up against each other, I think Charlie takes it.
Okay. Speed chess. Who wins?
Oh, Matt. Yeah. Hands down. Charlie's a war gamer. He likes to, I imagine that means that he likes to consider his moves. He's just not going to be able to cut it in that arena.
All right. Have you ever watched, or have you ever read Ender's Game?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So if it's a army of teenage Matts and an army of teenage Charlies playing 0G war battles, which team of clones takes the victory?
I'm going to give it to Matt this time. I have heard enough stories about teenage Matt, and I won't tell them here. Those are his horror stories about being a teenager and all those bad decisions to sell himself. But I've heard enough to know that he would be a terror. So several dozens of him would be a worst nightmare scenario.
All right, you guys all heard it here. Who would win in what types of fights? If you have another type of fight that you want to propose in the chat, feel free to drop it in, and I'll throw them at Chase as we keep on going. And
if I don't have a job by the time this is over, y'all are gonna. I'm opening up a GoFundMe. Yeah.
Okay, real quick, dance off.
I'm giving this to Matt as well because he's a big Wu-Tang Clan fan, and so I bet he's got some hidden moves in there.
There we go. All right, we'll pause and keep a couple of them going. I know we had one question from Meat Castle a little bit earlier. Let me pop that one up, and we're gonna chat about a couple other things. Let's see. You guys also said this is earlier when we were talking about zine months generally. It's dependent on each person's situation from what I've seen. Do you have an existing audience? Where is that audience? Do you need to build an audience? If your platform, if your project takes off on a larger platform like Kickstarter, will you use that platform to be successful? So this is more of a general musing rather than a direct question for us, even though there's a lot of question marks in there. Let's talk about that for a second. Like, where do you see the role of community in a lot of what's happening with ZiMo? Because you're not, like, as far as I know, you're not. Wait, maybe you are. Maybe I did see you're skulking around the Discord servers. But where are you, like, as somebody who's observing this, right? You're not running a project for this, who's taking it in from a journalistic eye. What do you see as some of the challenges for the community and some of the strength of the community that's already being built for Zine Month?
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit whenever I said that there was not as much sort of divestment from Kickstarter as a lot of people were hoping. I think that if you truly believe that, like, Kickstarter needs to go the way of the dinosaur, that you're probably going to be a little disappointed with, like, what ends up on the other side. Because I think even if everybody wins and Kickstarter continues to take L's, like, they have enough of an established audience and enough tools built in. They have a track record going that, like, they're going to stick around. And for some people, Kickstarter is everything that they need it to be. They don't need it to be anything else. I know for a lot of especially indie tabletop designers, that's just not the case. Yeah. Like, Kickstarter has failed to develop tools to help creators, like, really push their platform, push discoverability. But I know that discoverability is also a problem for basically everyone else. Itch.io is, like, it is balls hard to, like, search for stuff on itch.io unless you just know the name of the thing you're looking for. GameFound is, it's very early on, and GameFound's just missing a lot of tools that can put it up into sort of batting weight with things like Kickstarter. Indiegogo is not really for tabletop at all until this year somehow, for whatever reason.
Yeah, you'd see the odd, like, party game pop up on Indiegogo, right? Because Indiegogo's a very broad platform, so it's like, if you don't know who your audience is, Indiegogo might be for you, is a lot of the feel of it. Or if you're doing, like, pre-orders after a Kickstarter campaign, right? Like, that's another way that we've seen a lot of people, is that if they're doing it for a game at all. But yeah, it's been, other than party games, it's been very minimal as far as what's there. And then Games on Tabletop does have RPGs. Like, it is a largely an RPG platform for the most part, but it's underutilized, and it's really weird to say this, like GameFound is EU based, but GameFound has a very American and Anglified audience as far as who participates in the purchasing aspects of it. Games on Tabletop is very Eurocentric as far as its backers and supporters, and so if you're an American or Canadian creator, you're immediately looking at a lot of international and overseas transactions to buy into the strength of Games on Tabletop at the moment, even though I think the culture might be there a little bit more. No, I think that's huge, and I do think it does come down to, like, and even me, like, somebody who knows how to build community, has done community work. Like, we're going into our first project on GameFound was incredibly well funded. It was the highest funded project I've run so far, but I had 6 months of soft lead up, a month and a half of hard lead up, and was able to get it out there for 13 Hunters that I'm working on with Nobsk, like, and Sam. It was, hey, we're trying to get a couple of things taken care of so we can get the page up. The page is up a week beforehand. We made the choice to move it over there, 3 weeks beforehand, and so it's a lot more rushed, and we didn't have the time to do that lead work that you could build the community, build the excitement, showcase things that can then let you bring all those folks in. And it's also a supplement, which I think is a little bit harder of a push than if there's not a built-in audience than a standalone game, which our first project was. And so there's a lot of challenges that come up in that.
Yeah, I guess to really answer the question, what I see ZMonth as someone who does not back, or someone who doesn't like, create games, someone who doesn't have a project that does this. What ZMonth does for me is it gets me to recognize a lot of names and start to key in what these different creators, what their strengths and what their sort of like their field of creation really is. So as much as I know that like for ZMonth, for a lot of smaller creators, this could be something that keeps the fires burning for the next few months until the next project. I think where ZMonth is as far as like in terms of how people that are buying things, backing projects view it, it's much more about name recognition and putting creators on radars for whatever that next big project is that isn't in a tight sort of time constraint that ZMonth normally operates on. 2 weeks and then it's done. For a lot of people, if you miss that first email, you might just miss it. It's done. In 2 weeks, like that time has gone by and the project's closed.
There's a lot of talk in creator communities lots of times around like the great thing about 2 weeks is like you don't make much money in the middle. I was like, yeah, but the money you make at the end is also based on the discoverability of your project in the middle.
Yeah.
It's not, those things aren't disconnected. The longer you have in the middle for people to discover your project, the better you're going to do on the back end with last minute funding that's going to cause you to rise up on those last 48 hours when notifications and other things start to kick in. If you're using a platform that does that, because not all these platforms do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge thing that a lot of people are missing. It's like, that there is that slump in the middle. There's stuff happening during that slump. And one of the things that's been like good for me, and I actually think in a lot of ways good for Dicebreaker, good for other people who do journalism, marketing, or coverage of the indie RPG scene, is this shift has caused people to go like, oh wait, we can't, like before people were like, oh, I'd love any coverage you can give me. Now people are like, oh, I should be marketing my game, right? I should be getting coverage for my game. I should be lining that stuff up. I should be thinking about that. Like overwhelmingly, like I've gotten, I don't know if you know this, I did a press kit seminar right before things happened. But the biggest thing I've gotten asked both before and after, and sometimes not even just me directly, but in groups I'm in, is like, how does anybody get like Dicebreaker to cover? How does anybody get this group to cover them? And to a certain degree, it's like, I don't know all the time, right? I do know what I do and what the response to that is, and I do know what relationships I've cultivated and that I've seen come through on that. But like somebody was like, "How do you get Geek Native to cover you?" And I was like, "I don't know. I've never have gotten Geek Native to cover me." Like, and even I've asked people this time around who have, they're like, "Yeah, I don't know, luck of the draw, right?" But I think my overwhelming response was, "You ask." Like you reach out to people and say, "Hey, we've got this project coming up." People are like, "Wait, so they're just not like trolling the internet waiting for a project to launch?" So tell us a little about for you. So how do you approach finding people or games to cover?
Yeah, so I'm going to probably suck a lot of the magic out of what people may think of as like the tabletop journalism sphere, because it is dirty work that it's not clean cut at all. So when I first started this job, I was trawling Kickstarter quite a bit. This was back in late 2020, early 2021, before a lot of the Kickstarter alternatives started to gain a lot of steam. So on a slow news day, we would go to Kickstarter. I'd search by new and see what sort of tabletop projects caught my eye. And the ones that we covered were the ones that had a video that I could take screenshots of in a 16:9 sort of portrait stuff, so I could throw it up or landscape, so I could throw it up on the website, and enough description that I could sort of read and get a gist of the game without having to play it. Because there's the dirty secret. Probably the dirty secret is I play 5% of the games that I end up covering or reading about, just because I spend my whole day writing and researching stuff. I play games very rarely. I read more books than I will ever bring to the table. I buy more stuff than I will ever read, which is probably true for a lot of folks. So as time has gone on and these things have gotten a little bit more established, sort of through my own work, and by work I mean pestering you at a bar at PAX to teach people how to make press kits, which I'm eternally grateful for. Everyone's been doing a great job. The time that I spend like trawling the internet for games is time that I'm not, say, covering a press release from this board game company that we need to cover because it's going to bring in so many more page views than. The hard truth is, like, the board game coverage that we do in some of the sort of like higher like AAA stuff, the bigger company stuff, is going to get more page views than a lot of indie coverage, even though I would love to just do indie coverage.
Right.
We are trying to do the work to establish an audience that appreciates and likes reading about indie games. I will say I don't have access to numbers, and even if I did, I wouldn't give hard numbers, but I will say our work at Dicebreaker has helped that trend grow. People are getting more interested in reading about indie RPGs, but it is an uphill climb, and we have to scrape to like grab every minute to cover this space that we can from our other obligations that just keeps the lights on over at Dicebreaker. So at this point, what I have to do is basically tell myself, like, if it doesn't hit my inbox, I'm probably not going to cover it. And even if it does hit my inbox, if something breaks, if Kickstarter decides to go like ankle deep, like not just ankle deep, but like hip deep into blockchain stuff, I may not cover anything that week just because of other obligations. But like, if it hits my inbox, there's a good chance that I read about it, and I need to get better at sending emails saying like, "Hey, I saw your game. Thanks for sending this." At least to let you know you got read, right?
Right.
But at this point, yeah, I don't spend a lot of time trawling for projects unless it's just a slow day, because we've gotten to the point now where news is picked up, stuff is happening, we've got our beats, and as much as I would love to just cover weird games all day, I have to try to fight to like put indie games into that space as much as I can.
Yeah. Well, I think in you know, Navi and Meat Castle and a number of people like really do appreciate the Navi specifically said, I appreciate the thoughtful, honest, unsexy AF answer. You know, and the biggest thing, like, it was really funny. My and I don't even know what it is right now. It maybe it bumped up on this, but like my 4th most viewed video within a week of that workshop was that workshop video, right? And like I was joking like, oh, I thought you guys wanted games. Apparently you sickos want press kit workshops. But like it was like we were sitting in the bar and I was like, you know, I was thanking you for coverage. We were talking about some of the things and I was like, what's helpful for you? You told me some of the things. And then I was like, I know I'm very comfortable sending emails. I'm very comfortable following up. I'm very comfortable with a lot of things. And I've always been of the mindset, if I don't ask for it, like I can't blame other people for it not happening, right? And there are times I have a hard time with that, just like anybody does. Like I don't feel necessarily comfortable following up, but like a big part of it is cultivating the relationships, and knowing like, hey, no one else is going to advocate for your game. Like people aren't necessarily covering my game because I'm such a great person. They're covering my game because I make it easier for them to do, and I follow up. If I don't hear back from people and just say, hey, I just want to make sure you got it. I understand if you don't have time to cover it, but I really appreciate the work you do. And if you can, that's great. You know, like that's always been my MO. And it pays off reasonably well, right? Like, I've always found that to be a really good thing. I'm also a big fan of like, you reach out as one human to another human, right? You don't reach out as like, though I'm going to send things blanketly to the Dicebreaker inbox. Like I send it to you, I send it to 2 or 3 other people on staff, knowing that hopefully one person will see it and think this looks cool. But I've spent the time getting to know those individuals so that I know I can pester them directly also too, which I do think helps. So when there's people out there whose writing you love, if you see articles by people, I think it's always good to cultivate that, comment by them, connect with them socially, so that you can start to build that rapport. Even IO9 just picked up a new writer, somebody who I really love, who's been doing pieces for Polygon and Dicebreaker from time to time. And I'm very excited to see IO9 pick up more things within that indie RPG scene, along with a number of other things they'll be covering as well. And so, but yeah, the number one piece of advice of like, just ask, like make a press kit, send it out. Like, don't expect at this point that there's not like there's enough indie creators out there looking for coverage that if you like, I will reach out to people when I see cool games that I want to cover. But I am far more likely if somebody reaches out to me and says, I want this, I want this, I want this. Can we make that happen? To just be like, let me look at my calendar. What are things happening? After this is looking at the game and thinking this looks good and this does not look like a horrible person. Can we set a date, right? And sometimes I can't set all those dates, but it is a huge thing to just be able to ask. It is a big year for space games. Real Meat Castle and IO9 is going to make a great place for those games to appear, along with Dicebreaker, also too. You and I had a great conversation at PAX about journalistic integrity, and I enjoyed your take on it there. And I do want to kind of come back around because I think it's a conversation that will pop up in discourse around this stuff. And I would always differentiate, like, Chase is a journalist. Like, this is not just like a weird background passion. This is something you're professionally formed in. Like, I am not a journalist. Like, Plus One does not exist as a journalistic platform. We are, at the end of the day, we're publishers. Guess what? But we're also content creators, and by that I mean, like, we are marketers and community builders. Like, that's the work that we do. And so I don't ever, like, whenever somebody's like, what about your journalistic integrity? I was like, I don't have any. I have marketing ethics, but I don't have any journalistic integrity because that's not a thing that I do.
I'm a professional shill. Yeah.
Right. Like, that's, yeah, I'm 100% like your professional shill, willing to take on emotional labor that you don't want to. Please reach out in my DMs. But with that said, I did, as we were talking about that, it comes up on a regular basis. What are some of your thoughts as somebody who works specifically? Because it's not just like when you're talking broadly about journalism, that's kind of an interesting idea to explore. And it is an important thing, no matter what. Like, ethics and morality are always an important thing that I'm excited to talk with people about. But when you're covering an industry, that inherently looks really different. So I would love to hear from you as a journalist. Like, what are some of your thoughts around the discourse or around the idea of journalistic integrity as it relates to, like, industry coverage?
Well, first, like, you're a very specific kind of pervert to get excited about ethics in journalism, right?
I am, yeah, absolutely. I'm a total sicko. I get it.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised to know that this is one that a lot of us within, like, most enthusiast press, like, really talk about. And depending on the generation of writer, it can change. I think what really complicates this for a lot of folks is that, I got into writing right at the cusp of Twitch becoming a thing. And so now any writer, anyone who is a journalist now, has to sort of contend in a sphere with content creators, if we're using the broad term, mostly being like YouTubers and Twitch players, right? Which for a lot of publishers, especially larger publishers, they treat us as the same. We get the same outreach. We get the same invitation to events, even though the way we're going to approach that coverage is very different.
Yeah.
Which causes a lot of, I will say, not hurt feelings, but a lot of, like, real bubbling tensions behind the doors of journalism outfits. Because we get treated a lot differently. Journalists are sort of, like, approached by larger publishers that we are going to sort of give this sort of, like, gormless, fawning coverage of a game. And whenever we're critical, well, blacklists happen, but oftentimes you might just, like, get ignored on the next round of codes for a game or something like that. Because most bigger publishers are petty people. But if we're going to talk about ethics specifically, I will say, like, academically speaking, the way that I approach being an enthusiast press journalist is that I'm writing for the player more than I am for the designer or the creator, anything like that. So I try to keep my audience in mind first and foremost. And I think if you do that, that honestly tends to answer a lot of the questions and a lot of the concerns that people might have. Is that whenever I cover a game, whenever I do something, whenever I write about an issue, I am trying to inform the player, someone in the community who just, like, sort of plays a game or reads about games but isn't creating them, which in indie RPGs is kind of complicated, right? Because those two circles in the Venn diagram have a lot of crossover, maybe more so than a lot of other industries. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll turn this question around. What do you see? What kind of questions do you see people asking whenever they get concerned about the sort of ethics of journalism?
So, I mean, when it comes to me, it's always, like I said, it's always such an interesting thing. Like, I did a mega thread on it a while ago, like, about the difference of what I think I do and other people. Like, I know both myself, and I'll speak because he's spoken about it very publicly, for Jeff Stormer. Like, we're both enthusiastic individuals. Like, we don't, like, will I be critical about a game? Have I sat down with a number of creators in the last month and torn apart parts of their game, told them they were underprepared, told them they weren't ready to launch, told them that there's no way that this game is going to succeed? Oh, you bet I have. Like, right? Like, I absolutely have sat down with 5 creators and torn their stuff up and down because they asked me what I thought in private, and I set up a call with them after looking through their game. And lots of their stuff is tremendous, right? So if I look forward to covering when it's ready. but overwhelmingly, like, you as my audience are never going to hear that. And so people are like, well, if you're just enthusiastic, just supportful all the time, like, how could you be being honest? How could you be doing that? I also start with my audience in mind, right? And my audience is actually not like, it is designer oriented. Like, a lot of our stuff is designer oriented, but we root everything we do in play. Like, I'll do like general coverage, but I won't review a game I haven't played. Like, it is one of my ethical standards, because of the type of review I do. I review it from the experience of playing it, so I can break down the experience of play for you, so that you can know if this is a game for you, and if you want to play it with your players, that you can show them that video, and they'll have a pretty good leg on what they're about to do. So I'm making almost instructional marketing pieces, right? But a lot of it comes from, like, does money create bias, right? Which I think is so interesting, because it's like, Chase, you've mentioned this a couple times. You collect a paycheck, right, for writing, and Dicebreaker collects money from somewhere in order to pay you that paycheck. And I'm not proposing anything negative about Dicebreaker or Polygon or any of those other things. The way that money comes in through press is varied and wide, and not any specific thing. But it's not like money isn't changing hands in a journalism space, but is in a marketing space, right? So that's one of the big ones that can come up. And then, like, there's a lot of assumptions of, oh, you knew this person. And we just talk about relationships do matter. Like, you knew this person, so you covered their game and you covered it positively just to give them a boost because they're a friend. And I'm like, that's my number one bias, is you'll get coverage for me more easily if I like you. Like, if I like you, I'm not worried about money. I'm not worried about anything else. I'm going to cover your game, and I'm going to enjoy covering your game. Right. That's the easiest. That's my biggest form of bias. And so there's a lot of things that are really about, like, somehow supposing that journalism and marketing are dirty things in the RPG scene that we should get away from, while simultaneously everybody's like, why didn't I get covered? Is a lot of the dialogue out there, I feel like. If you're watching right now and you think there's another piece of this conversation that I'm missing, because I certainly, again, like, both Chase and I are coming at this from a coverage standpoint. Like, we're content creators. If you're a designer out there, if you're a player out there, if you have other thoughts about what you think about this, you disagree with us, drop that in the chat or the comments, because that's the conversation I want to have, right? Like, but yeah, I think a lot of it is just the assumption of no one's being critical enough, right? No one's being hard enough on these games. There's not enough critical discourse that's happening, is one side. And then the other side is like money and marketing and journalism are all kind of muddied together. And we can't trust anything that anybody says when they write a piece, right?
Yeah. So to that second point, I will say, yes, money and journalism is all marketed together. Does that mean you can trust it? No. Listen, everyone has to get paid. I would love for journalism to divest from advertising altogether. I would love for there to be, like, state-run journalism, so that I can pull a paycheck without having to have banner ads on the side of the website that I write for, or pop-ups, or, anything else. I would love to just be able to write, and then I earn a paycheck no matter what I write about, because just that's what I do for a living. That's just not how it works. I will say that anyone who believes that, like, I cover games to, like, for the people that I like to succeed, or there's any sort of, like, money exchanging hands or anything like that, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little mean here, is naive and needs to grow up, because that's just, like, not how the real world works. What I will say is that the choices that are being made in a newsroom, especially a newsroom as small as Dicebreaker, and I know as small as like Polygon's tabletop side, is that we have to make ruthless decisions about what we cover.
Yeah.
And that oftentimes the largest and maybe even the only concern is what is going to help us keep the lights on, what is going to help keep this website running. And sometimes that means we cover the Dragon game instead of an indie RPG because we need page views.
Yeah. And
sometimes that's the end of the conversation. I want to talk about a lot of other stuff. I would love to argue that we cover, this self-funded game that pulled in $10,000 versus the next booklet that just pulled $100,000. But we know it's going to get more page views, and I hate that that's the reality, but that is the reality. To the first point about more critical coverage, yeah, I would love more critical coverage of games. I will say, Dicebreaker doesn't do reviews in the traditional sense.
Right.
We'll do impressions if we play something and we really like it, or we have something that we think is interesting to say, but we just don't do reviews or any sort of critical coverage because it's a large time investment, especially for, like, board games and tabletop RPGs, that just does not pull the eyes to justify that amount of work. We are a small team. I will say that the editorial team, not the video team, but the editorial team at Dicebreaker is 3 people, including me, and I'm not even full time. Our hours are short and are already overstretched as they are. So if you want more like critical, like art criticism within the RPG space, you're not alone. So do I. In a year or two, I'd love if that was the case. I would love if I was able to like critically sit down and like dismantle this game, find out what makes it tick, and build it back up through my lens of experience and say what that means to me. Mm-hmm. I just don't have any opportunities to do that right now.
Yeah.
Maybe in the future.
Yeah. And again, I think a lot of this comes down to, for me as like, you should find content creators you like. Like if you're somebody who's like, I don't like what I see in the scene, well, go look around more, right? There are people who do really good critical discourse. There are people who do really dog shit critical discourse also too. So I want to
see
be
it on
very
Twitter
clear.
every day.
Yeah. But like there are people who do really good critical discourse, and if you're going to disagree with them a lot of the time when they do good critical discourse, the difference is like for me always like I can say, oh, I don't like this. Without saying the people who make this are bad and they're ruining RPGs, right? I think we have to consider what the designer, and this is like my big standard always is like critique happens in a relationship. You're never going to see a cold critique from me where the designer didn't invite me to give them critical feedback. And even if I want to, it would be, hey, I'll use Bats as an example. You know, John Battle, I would like to do some critique on this publicly. I just want to make sure that you're okay with that you know I'm doing it because I love this game and I've got these thoughts that I really want to put out there, not for any other reason. And John would have the option to basically say, I'd really prefer you wouldn't do that, because I don't need to do anything. And I use John because I don't think John is overly sensitive about any of this stuff. B, I think that they would actually relish the opportunity. And C, I think if they needed to push back on it for some reason, they would have a clear reason why. But at the end of the day, even if they didn't and they were just like, no, I'd prefer you didn't. Okay, cool. Like, I don't need to spend my time doing anything that's going to make a designer feel worse. Right. I'm not here for that. I'm not into that. There are so many other great games that I could just go be excited about and share about, that I could help other people discover and get to know, that are not the Dragon game or not other games that I might be more critical about. And I'd rather go put my energy into that, right? Like that's always been a huge thing for me. I think critique is best when it happens when there is no, it's not like we're going to take this one game and pull it apart, but we're going to take this idea that we see as a current in design right now and start to critically like talk about that. And our community conversations are where we host a lot of that. Let's get four or five horror designers on and talk about what is horror design and what does that look like and how do you create a play culture that supports that. That's the type of critique I want, because again, it's relationship oriented, it's geared, but again, that type is also very low stakes. I don't have to be an expert at that. I just have to create a platform in which people can have that dialogue. But I'll be honest, like those get decent views, but they're not the kind of views that are going to keep the lights on for Dicebreaker or a large platform. And so I think it's so critical to, again, understand like Plus One as a marketing outlet that does coverage, is highly concerned about community design and play, is going to look very, very different, because I don't have to make most of my decisions based on sheerly on the financial side of things, because I have a job that supports the work I do that's not the game stuff. For people who are doing full-time writing, who are running a studio, who are running a journalistic outfit, who are approaching it from a different reality, that's a different set of standards. And even Polygon and Dicebreaker and IO9 and all the other different platforms out there are going to have different sets of standards for what they're looking for and what they want to talk about and why they want to talk about that. So like, I think that's such a huge piece. And I think that would be my next kind of question for you. I know we're going a little bit over. Are you cool on time?
Yeah, I'm good.
Cool. You're doing freelance across a number of platforms. And I love seeing that. Like I remember, and I'll shit on a platform that you work for. Like I historically, if an indie RPG article came out from Polygon, surprise, but also was like, I'm just going to be upset if I read this. Then I was like, wait, there's a good article on Polygon. I was like, oh, well, Chase wrote this. Never. That's there's a number of other great writers now who are coming on. I do, to Charlie's credit, has brought in a number of voices and has gotten better about learning what he doesn't know, and giving that space over to other people to do it better. So for all that, I will say like Dicebreaker is still where I will always go for news, but I'm always super excited again, just like with Kickstarter. Even though I don't put Kickstarter and Dicebreaker in the same boats in my mind at all. I'm a big fan of there being numerous platforms where people can get good information, but working across numerous platforms, what are some of the differences that you encounter as some of the anchors between like why you might choose to do an article on Polygon versus Dicebreaker, and maybe how you flex your style a little bit if you do, when you choose which platform is going to come out on?
Oh, totally. So, I mean, just straight up, like Polygon will do, and when I say Polygon will do news, I mean Charlie's probably going to do news. I've done a few like newsy, like one of my latest ones was like writing about the Wordle RPG Jam and that's sort of more of a featurey sort of news piece. But if it's like a 500-word news piece about what's going on, that's probably Charlie writing it. He's got the news chops, and he's the one that's going to take that because that needs to be turned over in a couple of hours max. There's no time to like pitch that to a freelancer, get a rate set, prove all this by email, get a draft in, do that whole draft. And those are feature level stuff that takes a lot of like work and a lot of like reporting that goes into it. Polygon doesn't do a whole lot of that beyond a couple of like big hit pieces that's going to draw on some stuff. They are really sort of like, and when I say they, I mean Charlie is like sort of really gearing towards like reviews, bigger impressions and critical takes on stuff, that sort of like larger sort of like community scene coverage that we also do at Dicebreaker, but Dicebreaker is also very focused on just tabletop, meaning board games and RPGs and other analog card games. So we do news as well as impressions as well as videos. We are one outlet covering all of it. Polygon's tabletop is one vertical within the larger Polygon sphere who do movies and comics and video games and just media writ large. So Charlie has the space to just focus coverage where he thinks, the vertical would be most interested in covering. We get a little bit more granular over at Dicebreaker, so that's why you see me doing daily news stories over at Dicebreaker, but I might jump over to Polygon for like larger features, reviews, lists of indie games that are coming out this year, stuff like that. It's just like we just have different sort of budgets for different kinds of writing, and you'll see that at a lot of different publications.
Yeah, it's interesting the variety that creates though, because it is like it's a weird mix of like listicles and heavier news pieces on Polygon with a very consistent type of output and news features on Dicebreaker. And I think people oftentimes don't necessarily notice that about Polygon. Again, like a big part of that is historically not what I'm interested in coming out, but I again am very happy to see that grow and change, because it does mean more people with a journalistic mindset entering into the space, and that means more coverage. The more people who I see getting brought in to do a great article on Polygon or on Dicebreaker or on somewhere else, the more I know we're going to have people covering more games in the future, which is great because there are more and more games coming out that deserve that coverage, and so I'm very excited about that. Let's kind of pivot over to some of the specific news pieces though. So the actual thing you said, hey, somebody bring me on to talk about this. Let's talk about Kickstarter. Let's talk about your research. Let's talk about the excellent article that in one of the forums where we have an ongoing conversation about this, I just highlighted the last paragraph because it was such an excellent final articulation of, yeah, this isn't fucking good enough, Kickstarter.
I love being able to put just the tip on an ice cream cone or like the cherry on a sundae. I love when I get to write just a perfect last paragraph to sort of just top off a story. It always brings me such joy.
So let's talk a little bit about just your take, right? And I know like you've written words about this. I'll go grab your article that just came out that I'm talking about in just a second, and drop it in the chat also and in the description as well. But you've been doing a little bit of a deeper dive into this. You've been sitting with folks. You've been talking about this right now. I know that y'all are looking actively for people who have talked to Kickstarter about this. What are maybe some of the things that didn't make it into the article that were significant takeaways for you that helped formulate this? Because I think for a lot of people, first of all, we've seen a ton of misinformation. We've seen a ton of misinformation come out. Like they're very early on, because you and I, we were hanging out at PAX the week this got announced. Like it got announced. You flew to Philadelphia. The next night we were in a bar drinking and talking about this. And like, man, this is probably going to be a lot of our weekend, but man, I hope we get to actually have fun and do some fun stuff this weekend also too. We did. The announcement had just been made. Hey, blockchain is coming, right?
Yep.
more to be said later. It read very weird. But people are already jumping to NFTs. By the end of that weekend, the Kickstarter is just trying to skirt security laws in Europe was all over the internet. Like there was all these different things that were being said, that were being talked about. We were told we would get a lot more clarity in January, which never arrived. And just last week, we got a little bit more, but not anything substantive other than so where have you been looking for information? What's your process as you're approaching this type of article? And what are some of the things that may not have come out in the article for you that you were really surprised by as you were going through?
Yeah, so it may not come as any surprise to the audience here, basically anyone who's had to deal with Kickstarter, that they are not exactly forthcoming with information. Basically, I will say, like, they are really tough to get in touch with, and I probably know as much from Kickstarter as a source as everyone else does. I've been talking to Kate Bernick, which is a communications director over at Kickstarter, getting me in touch with Anya Combs, head of games over at Kickstarter. I'm still awaiting a few comments from Anya specifically, but I will say, I will sort of confirm I got the same treatment that Charlie over at Polygon did, which is they just, declined to answer specifically any questions about blockchain in regards to like the games vertical over at Kickstarter. So I've had to go elsewhere and try to like talk to people who had some run-ins with Kickstarter. And I've talked to one or two and some more. And I will say that at least, I'm still trying to broaden who I speak with and get a little bit more information. But it seems that the workers at Kickstarter, like the rank and file, know or about as in control of as much information as we are. This seems to have like maybe caught them broadside, all of this development, and they've sort of had to like roll with the punches, kind of toe the party line, understand that they can't say as much because it's all hush hush, really secret, or there's NDAs. I'm trying to untangle that, but I will say that like the sort of like staff workers at Kickstarter probably don't have very much control over this. And so that's one bit of nuance that I think is missing. And this is going to come across me trying to like be apologetic for Kickstarter. And it's just me saying that like, understand that like the folks working their day jobs at Kickstarter have about as much control as like Starbucks workers have over like the executives of Starbucks, like Kickstarter has a C-suite of employees that, if you read the article over on The Beat, are totally fine just sort of sticking their foot halfway down their throat the first chance they get to speak with a journalist. If for those who haven't read this article, it's over on Comics Beat. I'll
grab it too. Yeah.
Yeah. There's just like one little bit that I wanted to draw out here. This was a really well done interview, I will say, by Sean Z. They ask, could you get a little bit more information on that? Right now, blockchain is remarkably slow. It can take up to 4 hours. They basically ask, like, if the goal is interoperability and data transfer, why not use something that already exists and extensively used? And this is a question that a lot of people ask, like, why blockchain? Like, what is it going to do? Kickstarter has opted up a few solutions that range from helping to protect backers from projects that are just trying to like shill them, like just trying to get money and then like leave, give backers the availability or the ability to be paid to basically report on projects that they think aren't operating in good faith, and then also to extend payment into different regions, to just helping fulfillment be a little bit easier. There's like a wide range of solutions that Kickstarter has put up that they're not able to really say why blockchain is the correct answer for this. Like, what is it actually going to do? And so they asked, like, this is that COO getting asked that specifically. And they say, I'll admit I'm not the technical expert on this, and there's a lot to explore. But based on some of the more technical investigations into this data can be structured and moved more efficiently on blockchain. So when asked the question of like, how does this solve problems, they offer up efficiency, which to me is really like the take here is that like Kickstarter is getting into this technology, at least based on what I know now, to make their operations as efficient as possible. For backers, for creators, probably not. For Kickstarter, yeah, I think it's just making things more efficient for them. They're able to like and I even made a sort of pithy tweet about this, but I think the goal of moving some of their operations to blockchain is to use the decentralized nature and the sort of pseudo-anonymous nature of blockchain to distribute a lot of the responsibility of running this platform and a lot of the sort of like both financial and legal obligations that come along with that onto other people and not them, while still maintaining all of the cash flows that they have control of.
Right.
And I don't think that they're being like money grabbing insofar as like any company is money grabbing. I really just think they see this as a way to just sort of like not do as much for the same amount of money.
Right. And it seems like, but it also seems like it plays into almost all the constant critiques we see about Kickstarter from both designers and backers, but in very different ways, right? Like, so the concept of that backers can somehow become a watchdog organization. So Kickstarter and Chase, I don't even know how common of a term this is outside of design circles. I'm sure you're generally familiar with the concept of a super backer. Yeah. And whereas there are individuals who wear that with a badge of pride, and I hesitate to admit this publicly, but I certainly am one. I'm certainly a super backer. Like I back far too many projects to not be. It's almost a badge of shame for designers because if there is somebody complaining in your comments on your Kickstarter page, guess what words are going to appear next to their name? Super backer. And they are people who consider themselves armchair experts on running projects a lot of the time. And they are people who constantly harass creators who are just trying to get their game done, who are usually not full-time at doing it. And there is a level of toxicity built up. All Kickstarter to saying to the designer at that point in time is, we actually want to turn these people into cops. We want to turn these people into cops who can now get rewarded for narking on your project if they don't like what's happening. As a designer, that's terrifying, right? Yeah,
they are effectively saying that they can use these like extra cash flows to sort of chip off. I think the number that they threw up was like chip off 5% of a cash flow to essentially, like you said, deputize super backers to go and narc on projects that they think are doing something wrong. Whether those people will be trained to identify, will be held accountable for like misrepresenting anything, probably not. They're just like, it's going to be a report system like we see anywhere else on Twitch or any other platform that is going to be immediately abused.
Right. And if we think advertiser bias influences journalism, let me tell you what assigning a bounty to something does to the process of clarity on whether or not this person is doing something wrong, or you can just get a chunk of change for saying they are, or interpreting things in the worst way possible and doing zero due diligence. Like, we see this in our society all over the place, but it's being proposed in this article as a good thing. So from the other side, from the backer side, the other interesting thing is they're trying to divest themselves further from accountability, which is one of the things that many backers have consistently asked Kickstarter to do more on. To say, we want you to be more accountable as an organization that is hosting these games for delivering these games. And that's not just individual backers. That's also large organizations, including a number of governments now, are starting to have conversations around how crowdfunding generally works, not just aimed at Kickstarter, and what that should look like within their regions. And yes, the EU news was a really kind of a smoking gun as far as, is Kickstarter doing it to circumvent this? But EU privacy and security laws are significantly higher than they are in the US and a lot of other parts of the world, and they are absolutely going to start interfering with the way that a lot of the data side of crowdfunding works, and blockchain would absolutely help with that. That's not necessarily the reason they're doing it, but we're seeing a lot more conversations about accountability for people who host crowdfunding. And again, this does seem like a way to say we want to be less accountable for that, even though that's people's common critique is, well, why would I back a Kickstarter because I don't know if that person's going to do it, and Kickstarter isn't going to do anything if that person does not fulfill on their obligation to get that game out, to the point where we see people run project after project after project, having never fulfilled one after years and years of no communication on a project, but still they'll run another one with no issue because of whatever. We don't know because it's sophisticated behind things already. And this seems to also increase that potential from my read. I don't know if that's something that you see in those conversations also.
Yeah, and I definitely do see that. I see people talk about this all the time. And through my read, I will Kickstarter, in both of its, like the one back in December and the one they just did a few days ago, cite their charter for their
public benefit charter.
Yeah, the public benefit company charter as like, and one of the things that they do is like to like both be accountable, but also it's explicitly to not use a lot of tax loopholes. And I
Right.
feel like they're using that as a sort of like Boy Scout language to be like, look at us, see, we're not going to use tax loopholes. We will try to circumvent international laws around like data security and like transparency on those sort of fronts. I think that folks would be smart to look at what Kickstarter is doing with blockchain and refer back to the ongoing struggles that Facebook and other platforms are having with
Right.
specifically U.S. courts, but international courts as well, as how they're able to operate without any culpability whatsoever because they are a platform, not a website. So they can't be held responsible for the content that is on their website. I think that is not the same laws when it comes to crowdfunding as the EU laws sort of
Right.
dictate. But I think that they are using that playbook to approach blockchain as a solution to some of those problems that are probably a few years down the road.
Yeah. And again, like the hard thing is with all this right now, I've been very clear on my stance of this. I'm against blockchain. I have issues with the Kickstarter announcement. I have issues with a lot of things happening at Kickstarter. My decision to move away from Kickstarter is about a pattern of behavior from Kickstarter that I want to divest myself from. And it's the same type of pattern that if somebody's significant other was exhibiting, I would say it's a toxic relationship. Get out of it. And so that is my take. As it doesn't have to do with that specifically, because I also do know that 20 years from now, blockchain technology will probably be far less energy intensive and probably be far more normative, and we will probably see that not be an issue. So saying no blockchain ever is a short-sighted statement. Even with their clarity around NFTs, it was kind of like a for now state. Like a lot of this was a for now statement. How do you feel about like so even going forward? Like I said, I know you're starting to gather data about this. It's a little forward looking. If you can't talk about this yet, that's totally okay. Like as they're saying, we want to form this committee, we want to form this community, we want to. What are some of the things that you guys are kind of keeping an eye on as far as from a journalist perspective that's news interesting for you as they're kind of looking forward to this proposed accountability group?
Yeah, so I really am interested to see what they're going to do with this group. Some of my big questions that I have really unanswered because all we know is that they're doing this group. We don't know anything more about that. I am going to be looking at the names that they announce and what they say that those people are going to do. I also will be reaching out to those people almost immediately, be like, hey, did they make you sign an NDA? Can you talk at all about the work that you're doing? Because if not, my only assumption is that they're going to be doing nominal work, ostensibly good work, but they're largely a vestigial organization, and they're hoping that buys them enough goodwill with the public that this thing can be just sort of hushed and forgotten within a year's time.
Right.
Like it is just accountability for a PR statement.
And for me, like you mentioned the public benefit charter and how that gets brought up, and it feels like a weird shield every single time.
Yep.
Of course, we couldn't be lying to you. Of course, we couldn't be doing anything wrong. Of course, this is all fabricated. None of this is really a problem. And you know how you can know that it's not because we're a public benefit charter company. And first of all, most of us have zero idea what that actually means, right?
Yeah.
The way that they use the term makes me wonder if they know what it means. I would say at the end of the day, it seems to be relatively meaningless and becomes like you would see in politics a lot of times, them picking a single issue to say, we're going to use this as a shield to hide all the things we know you hate over here and say, hey, you absolutely can trust us because of this one thing. Just don't pay attention to this other stuff that seems to completely contradict what's happening over here. Is 100% how the public benefit charter gets brought up over and over and over again with no sense of actual intent or meaning behind it. I love it. I think this goes back to like we were talking earlier about critical realities. I love if anybody thinks that Dicebreaker or anybody's in the pocket of big Kickstarter right now, I would encourage you to go read the article. I would encourage you to look at what the employees are saying. I would encourage you to look at the fact that a number of employees have quit over this information and are no longer with the company. People who were in secure positions who may not have been part of the games thing. And also remember, like the individuals at the company are not the company itself. Those people are trying to make it through the day in the same way we are, and everybody's making whatever choice they are within that. But as generous as you can be with those individuals, even though I find it very hard sometimes when we're getting stonewalled and no answers, and they don't necessarily respond by treating us like humans, we still, I think, only make the scene better when we're able to demonstrate the kind of grace and goodness we would desire from them to them. And so until they individually prove themselves to be bad actors, I would encourage people to give them that space. But like I said, your closing piece from that article, I'm going to read it because I thought it was so great. And like I said, I dropped it in a forum. Like your closing nail in the article that you put out was Kickstarter remained almost completely silent for 2 months, leaving many to assume no explanation would come. What finally arrived is a doubling down on a toxic technology and a reliance on backer and creator powered counsel to provide a moral framework for the massive company's future. Users can take solace in the present lack of NFTs on the platform, but Kickstarter's relationship with the blockchain is only beginning. This is, I think, an excellent statement that clearly shares your authorial voice, where you stand on it, without being jaundiced, right? It's a very hard, very direct, this is not satisfactory statement, without forcing people or drawing conclusions that are not currently doing it. And when we talk about, if we're going to talk about journalistic integrity, that's what I'm looking for. Somebody to not abandon their authorial voice, to not fail to say what they're thinking or be critical when there is a need to be critical, but also not inflate this with artificial speculation on what's to come, just saying, yeah, we don't actually know. And that's actually just as bad in some ways. And so I really appreciated it.
I mean, there was a draft that was a lot more vitriolic that I toned down, because you're right. I needed to be a little bit more fair. I mean, there was a lot that I could say, but yeah, in writing that article, it is enough just to go off the facts and to say this is the road forward as we see it.
Yeah.
And if that gives you trouble, again, I think a large part of reporting on things like this is just to lay out the facts as they are and to let the reader frame them in their own experience and draw that conclusion. And all you're doing is just trying to lead the reader towards those conclusions that they would naturally take. Because I'm sorry, I'm someone who believes that objectivity is an artifact of the 1960s, back when cable news was just becoming a thing and Walter Cronkite sort of ruled the airwaves, and I have no place for it. Objectivity can go die a quick death for all I care. We live in a world, we are all people who live and wake up and suffer and go to sleep to wake up and suffer some more. I'm going to write from the perspective of a person who's just trying to help other people understand the world around them a little bit better.
Yeah. And again, at the end of the day, Meat Castle said it earlier. I think if you're looking at the work that Dicebreaker does, the work that Plus One does, even though they're very different, if you're looking at anybody out there who does coverage within this scene and you're I'm not seeing what I'm looking for, go do it. Go look around more and see if you can. Ask people if they know people who are doing that type of coverage. If they're not, consider stepping up and making sure those things are being said in a way that you think they should be said. I'm going to just hit back on one of my things. It's in relationships is where the best of those things happen, right? When we stop, when we talk, when we say, here's what I'm thinking, when we listen to what other people are thinking, that's where a lot of these things we see that clarity and refinement. If we look at the Beat article, it was so beautiful to watch that COO step into the minefield of that. Very good, very hard, very direct questions from the interviewer, and a COO who very quickly clarified how bad things actually are. And that didn't happen by that journalist saying, I'm going to throw a bunch of things out there, and in complete absence of anything. It was by getting into a conversation with somebody and letting them tell you all the horrible things, and all the worst version of things that are worse than we can imagine. And good journalism creates space for the most beautiful things to happen. It creates space for the absolute worst things to happen, or to be revealed, I should say. And I think that it's great to see all those things happening right now. Chase, one more time, anything before we hop off, anything else that you want to share about just kind of the work that you're doing right now? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah. I mean, so you've seen me work elsewhere, but truly and honestly, Dicebreaker is kind of where my heart lies. And if you like the work that Dicebreaker does and you want to see us do more, you want to see some of that critical coverage, you want to see more video content or just more coverage of indie games, honestly, the best two things that you can do. One, just read the site, page views equal money in our pocket at the end of the day. But two, Dicebreaker does have a membership program, Dicebreaker Plus. It's just on the YouTube side for now. I don't know about further plans, but we would always like to build that out. And so if you join there, you will have an active voice both in seeing all that extra content, but helping to lead where that goes. it could go anywhere. It could lead to, live streams of indie games. It could lead to like just giving us more space to cover the weird art projects that we want to cover that the scene is doing. But the only way that we're able to do that is largely we get money from a lot of different places. Our favorite place to get money is directly from the people who support us and like read and appreciate our content. So if that's something that you want to see more of, you have a direct way to help support us.
Yeah. I love that. And like I said, we are like, I'm not, because again, relationships are important to me. Like, I don't know Charlie Hall other than we follow each other on Twitter. I do know you. I do know Wheels. I do know a lot of the team members there, having sat in video calls with them, interviews, having had them on the show, having messaged back and forth with them, having interacted with them. It's a delightful group of people who I absolutely adore, who do tremendous work out there. Wheels' most recent video of We Have to Talk About D&D was such a solid take, and it made this is one of my greatest shames. My 14-year-old who plays 5th edition, and does not play any of Dad's games.
No.
I've been thinking I really want to check out more indie games. Like, how do I follow Dicebreaker? Like, can I do that? And then like the next video was like an hour long on how to make like compelling villains, and they were like, "This is too long." I was like, "No, it's like a total mix. Like, just watch the 10-minute videos. You're fine." But like, It was still like that video was they were just listening to me watch it, sitting next to me at the table, and it convicted them to be like, "Oh, that was a really solid take." I've been thinking, like, I always harass them about it. Like, I've been thinking I should look at more indie games, and that convicted me. Like, where should I start, right? And they play tons of solo games that I give them that I just think they just don't think about are actually indie games, but it's fine. So I would highly encourage people, if you're able to go support Dicebreaker. To follow Chase over on Twitter also too. I could talk to you for another couple of hours. I can't wait till I am down in Dallas, or you are back up here in Philly, or we're at some place together again so we can hang out some more. And like I was saying beforehand, I would love to have you back on anytime. But until next time. First of all, go support 13 Hunters and come back tomorrow. We're going to be talking about a couple things, final announcements, things coming up. What do we got? We've got some things are hidden. Here we go. Tomorrow on Wednesday, we've got team 2 of the members, Austin and Amanda from the Deimos Academy Kickstarter project that's coming up with Banana Chan and a number of other folks who are going to come on and talk about this. It's a Paper Dolls horror game. Yeah, it's one of my top anticipated games of 2022. I'm so excited to talk to this team. We will be playing the game next month. We're still working out a final date on that, but please come ask questions about this very, very cool RPG that's going to be launching next month. Additionally to that, we've got the Together We Jam, which is a Down We Go and Through the Void inspired RPG jam. So it's going to be games that are based on the Together We Go system. You can find out more about this over on itch. If you check the pin tweet at +1EXP, you'll find more information there also too. But it's rules light, minimalist games, super modular content design. You can create things for any of the games that currently exist for Together We Go, or you can create whole new standalone games. I already know of 3 full new games that are going to be coming out of this jam that people are working on. And I would love to have you join us for that also too. We additionally have, as he hides things, we have on Thursday an actual play of In the Blue Light with Chris Bissett playing with us, Sean F. Smith running the game, and a number of members of our team who will be on there. If you want to help support what we do, you can always go become a content champion over at Ko-fi.com and support us directly. Or if you buy any of our games at +1.games, it helps support us as well. The number one thing we'd love to have your support with right now is backing 13 Hunters or going to checking out Dicebreaker. I'll leave it with the comment that Gorgor Big just tossed in the chat. And that is Dicebreaker was what introduced me to the wonderful world of indie games. Thank you so much. This has been Chase Carter, freelance writer, but as he said, his heart lies very much with Dicebreaker. And so until next time, class is dismissed. We'll talk to y'all soon. Bye, everybody.